So, what would your recommendation be for someone who wants to kind of start explore this? And what would you say the biggest disparity between your expectations versus how this has actually unfolded over the past 2.5 years have been, and kind of words of wisdom from someone who's been in the trenches doing it?
Is there's a lot of talk about how you can find a business that's easy to run and like has management team in place and et cetera, et cetera. It's hard to find any form of entrepreneurship that doesn't require your entire being in the first few years and more. And I think if you're out there trying to find a business to buy or a way to get into entrepreneurship that doesn't require your full being and more for at least a few years, you might be looking for the wrong thing. And if you're looking right now, it's probably your first time getting into the sea. Like it takes some reps before you can chill out a little bit. And I'm still not there. So that's been the biggest shocker. For others, they're looking for that business that has a GM in place. And the bottom line is if that's what you're looking for, you have to understand that GM might leave. And then all of a sudden you are the one doing it. And so just be ready for that.
Lucas, talk to me about car auto parts, or auto parts, I guess.
I bought this company, Newark Auto, about 2 years ago. So in July of 2021. And it's about 120 years old. And we manufacture carpets and floor mats. And now we also do headliners and door panels for classic cars. So all of these different interior trim parts. It sounds super niche. I mean, it is super niche. And it's not very sexy. Although, so relative to like a startup, it's not very sexy, but relative to a plumbing business, it's pretty cool. And when I was looking to acquire a business, I wasn't looking for startups. I was looking at plumbing businesses, HVAC businesses, home service businesses, like all of these really non-sexy businesses. And so this one actually really stuck out to me as something that was cool and an industry that I would have fun being in. And so, but I mean, people ask me like, why did you do this? And it's much more of a, like, you got to zoom all the way back to when I decided I wanted to buy a business versus start a business. And then when I decided to buy a business, like why I decided to buy a business. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, what type of business am I looking for? Right. And and so it wasn't like I had come to this next phase of my career and I was like, I want to buy a trim parts business for classic cars, right? It was, I want to buy a business with these certain criteria. First, it was, I want to buy a business, period, instead of start one. Then it was, I want to use this specific loan program to buy a business, which means now I'm targeting a certain size and certain earnings profile with certain multiples. And then it was, I want a business with these criteria, these traits that suit me well. And then it was, oh, here's this business, Newark Auto, that actually matches what I'm looking for quite well.
So let's zoom out, because I think it'll be helpful for that framing. So even before like Newark and getting into like more about what you do and how that journey's been over the past 2 years, you said, you are a serial entrepreneur. You've started other companies before. You started, let's go with sexier or more traditional startup businesses where you were founding it, you were running it, you were, raising capital. Maybe touch a little bit on that, but then I'm more interested in kind of to dive in to the decision of, oh, I want to buy a business now. And I want to buy not just any business. I don't want to just go find a failing startup that maybe has some cool, sexy tech or some tech that is going to be, a $1 billion company, but specifically the journey and the path that you went on, including that loan program. So give a little bit of background and then also tied into how did you get to that decision of, I want to buy a more old school business,
Yeah.
I guess, if you will.
So I've always been entrepreneurial. Probably like a lot of the guests on your podcast with you, like in high school, I had like side gigs, like tutoring and stuff like that. And then in college, I wanted to start my first real business is what I said when I got to Northwestern. And so I started a coffee business. I wanted to I joined the entrepreneurial program there, like the entrepreneurship program, which is called the Garage, and they were really like tech, like Uber was up and coming at the time, and everybody was, wanting to code something and, more like your world. And I didn't have any of those skills. But I, I grown up with the dad and then grandpa and, multi-generational entrepreneur, family. And so that lifestyle that my dad had, is something that I wanted for myself. And so I met a mentor who was like, I actually had barbershops when I was an undergrad, when I was at Northwestern. And I was like, wow, that's cool. I could actually just start a brick and mortar business. Like, I don't have to learn how to code. Um, and I'm a big coffee guy. I grew up in New York City, and there was really poor coffee in Evanston at the time. And so I was like, okay, I want to start, I want to address this problem on campus, bad coffee. Um, and there's not good coffee, and it's hard to get it. And so we started this coffee bike where we would load kegs of cold brew onto this coffee bike. It was called the brew bike, and then sell it on tap on campus, which went really well until it got cold outside. Um, and then we started this bike with like an Indiegogo campaign. The university gave us some money. I took all the money from my bar mitzvah that people had given me, which was not a lot of money, and put it into this coffee bike. And we launched this thing with like, we spent all of the cash that we had raised, which is probably like 25 grand, on like the bike and, the legal stuff that we needed to do to form the company and the permitting and all of that. And then we didn't know what working capital was. So like, we
So you
launched
spend
this,
all
and
your
then it's like
money on starting up,
we
and then
spent
you're like,
all of the money, and then it's like, wait, I have to run payroll on Wednesday and I haven't. The sales that I made on my Square account this week didn't get deposited in my bank account yet. Like, what am I supposed? So then all of a sudden, the credit card debt. Like, we started spending on credit cards, and that was like the first few years of the coffee business. But we eventually grew into this indoor location, and we kind of built this little coffee kiosk ourselves, and it got up to about like 100,000 a year in sales with the bike and the coffee kiosk, and then some wholesale we were doing on campus, and all of it was bootstrapped. And that was super fun. Like, I had so much fun doing that. And then I met a Booth MBA, and he and I teamed up, went through an accelerator program to kind of expand this concept to more campuses. And we raised some outside capital. We did well in the competition. So we raised, $1 million pre-seed, and then we did a $2 million seed. And then there were a bunch of, and then COVID hit, and we did some more funding during COVID and an e-commerce play to get through that. And then we were at 12 schools running this student run coffee business. It was all student run. I forgot to mention that part, which was what the brand really was. It was called Brew Bike. And um, I had graduated, and it was 2 years after I graduated. And I was just like, the Booth MBA had become the CEO. Um, we had raised capital in a way such that the outcome needed to be huge in order for us to have any sort of uh, outcome for ourselves, um, or really the investors. I mean, it was just, we'd raised so much capital, and the business hadn't grown as much, and I kind of had seen the writing on the wall. Um, and I was interested in being a business owner. Like, I wanted to go back to that period of time that I talked about before, where there was like debt, and we had to make things. We actually had to be cash flow positive to make the business work. I just thought that was so much fun. It was a lot more stressful, but it was a lot more fun. And so I left, and I left because I realized, wow, I could buy a business instead of start one.
how did you get to
And
that
yeah,
realization of like, okay, I can buy a business, especially when you're in this tech world, this startup world, this venture world of raising and just growing and growing and growing, and we're going to be $1 billion
totally.
company. How did you make that mental shift over to, well, I could just buy an existing business?
Well, first of all, I think my dad's business is like traditionally debt financed, small. Like, it's a larger business, but it's small business relative to like what we were trying to build at Brew Bike. And so he would always look at our financials and be like, "What is this? Like, what is this startup? Like, it makes no sense. How are you able to raise all this money?" Right? And then and also, I think I had gotten to a point where I was also like, "What is this? Like, how is this ever going to work?" um it's it just didn't make sense to me. But like, the business, like, right, a bunch of student run coffee shops and all these different college campuses, that could have worked if we had focused on making each campus really profitable and generate cash, and I always was like, I wish I could do that. So I was in my head kind of reverting to this cash flowing small business theme, that's what I was kind of seeking next, right? And so I something that was more sustainable, if you will. That's what I would talk to my entrepreneur friends about. I have a bunch of entrepreneur friends, and we would always talk about this stuff, right? So, like our friendship, um, and so I was sitting one day with my buddy who had gone through Kellogg, and he talked about ETA, which is entrepreneurship through acquisition, and he told me all about, which is what I did. It's right, acquiring a business and becoming an entrepreneur through that. And so I I ended up reading a few books about it. Buy Then Build was really the one that hit home for me. It's so Walker Dybel wrote this book about um, how to buy a small business as an individual, with not with a search fund. There's kind of two different. There's search fund entrepreneurship, which requires raising outside capital, buying a larger business and owning a smaller percent of it, but a lot less risk involved. Probably no personal guarantee on a loan. Um, and you don't have full control over the business. And then essentially your search fund is more like you're organizing a private equity deal, and then you're the operator in the private equity deal with more equity than a general, like any if you were to go in on a private equity deal that had already occurred, because you organize the whole deal, so you have more, you get a little bit more equity. And then the self-funded search is generally with this SBA loan, Small Business Administration, so it's a federal loan, and it's called the 7A loan. And at the time, in ZERP times, when I was searching in July of 21, and kind of when the book was written, um, you could finance 90% of an SBA loan up to $5 million, right? So, and the businesses are valued at 2 to 4 times discretionary earnings, or EBITDA plus whatever the seller was taking home. So let me like kind of break
Yeah,
that down a little bit
break
more.
it down. Yeah.
So you could buy a business. This is just the self-funded search path. And this was the math that I was doing in 21 when interest rates were a lot lower. Now you need to bring more equity to the table more often. And it's a little bit,
I.e., more cash
it's,
out of your own pocket.
or you can bring in a few investors. And I could talk a little bit about, let me first talk about what the deal structure was, and then I'll talk about how it's changed. So I wanted to find, you could buy a business up to five, you could take out a loan up to $5 million with this program. So let's talk about a $3 million business, right? Um, the businesses that are like in that you can target and buy with this loan are generally doing, let's say, sub $1 million a year in EBITDA, or what it's called is seller's discretionary earnings. And that's how much profit the business brings in. And then you add in whatever the seller's taking home as a salary or dividends or whatever. So,
And the
um,
seller is really, the person who's been the entrepreneur, the person running the business. So it's their total
correct.
compensation plus the profit. And that's kind of the baseline
Exactly.
multiple that the deal is valued off of.
And a lot of times in these little businesses, they might be doing 3 million a year in sales and showing on the P&L a net income of $300,000, and that's because the seller's taking home $500,000 in, and that's in the operating expenses under wages and salaries, right? And so you would add that in, and then the actual earnings of the business would be $800,000, right? And so that would be, you would then multiply that by 2 to 4 times. So it would be somewhere between 1.6 and $3.2 million business. That's kind of that's pretty much how deals are structured in this sub $1 million EBITDA range, for these small businesses that are not like fast growing startups. But fast growing startups are usually not traded at this size. So they usually only trade when they grow to much larger sizes, because there would be no return for investors and founders if they sold at this size. Anyway, so um, right, so that 1.6 to $3.2 million business, I that's earning 800,000 a year in discretionary earnings, um, would trades for 1.6 to 3.2. And at the time when interest rates were very low, I could finance that acquisition for, I could take out a loan for 90% of that. So
You borrow 90% of that purchase price from the federal government, with basically what, 2% interest or something crazy low.
I had a 6% interest rate on my loan,
Yeah.
fixed. Fixed for 10 years. Most people didn't fix it at the time. Most people had variables, so now it's up at 11 or whatever. But it was actually like the smartest decision I've ever made. I paid like a few quarter points more to fix it, and I've saved so much money. Anyway,
Right.
the so 1.6 to 3.2, let's call it a $2.5 million, right? Let's say the purchase price is $2.5 million. So you borrow 2.25 million, right? So you take out that 90% loan, and then you only put down $250,000, that 10%. You sign a personal guarantee on that 2.25. Okay, so there is risk here. And then all of a sudden you put down $250,000, 10%, to buy a business that generates 800,000 a year in discretionary earnings, right? 40% of that $800,000. So, what is that? $320,000 a year is now going to service that loan. It was about 40%. So it's a 10-year amortization of the loan. And so you're left with what I said, 320,000. So you're left with $480,000 a year in essentially free cash, right? That comes through the business. And then that 320,000 is building equity, right? So you're paying off that loan, and after 10 years, you own 100% of that, and that full $800,000 is yours. And all of that is just with the $250,000 down, which sounds like a lot, and a lot of people don't have $250,000. And there's ways to structure this so that you can bring in some minority investors to help with the down payment on the loan, but you end up paying back that $250,000 in year one if everything goes accordingly, because right, there's still about $500,000 coming through the business. And so, and for people who are in the startup world, they're like, what? Like, how does this exist? And that was my reaction. I was like, what? And again, I'm describing it like an amazing deal that is very hard to find. People spend years searching for this deal that I'm describing. The business I bought was a lot smaller than this, and I've bought two other businesses and combined the three of them since then, and with the goal to kind of get the business to the size of the deal that I'm describing. But that's kind of the route that I ended up going in. And now what's changed is essentially, instead of putting down 10%, you usually have to put down 20% or 25%. And
Meaning
deals
in
that are trading at
2023, that's kind of the amount of cash
yeah,
and
so that
risk that you have
deal
to
that
take.
I described, instead of $250,000 down, you might have to put $500,000. And there's ways to raise that money from investors. And then also you might need to it might need to trade for a lower multiple. There might need to be a seller note, which means the seller of the business is financing a certain amount of the purchase price themselves. So the SBA might do a 70% SBA loan, the seller might do 10%, and then you might need to put down 20% in equity or cash at close, right? So different ways to structure it now. It's just a little bit more complicated, but it's still doable.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's so fascinating to just kind of hear, yes, this is an ideal deal mapped out in 2021 kind of environment, but these are also real deals that existed. I'm going to spend $250,000. I'm going to get $250,000 in equity in a business. So it's not like you're even spending that money; you're just putting that into equity.
Correct.
And then the federal government is going to loan me over $2 million. And then based on that, I'm going to pay that back over 10 years. And then after even paying back the Fed each year, I'm going to get $500,000 in profit. I mean, and again, maybe that's an ideal deal. Maybe you adjust the numbers a little bit and you get, $300,000 in profit. But it's still absolutely incredible that you can basically park $250,000 into a business. Again, you're not even spending it. You're just kind of investing it in that business because you own that equity. And then you get free flowing cash each year. And it's so contrasted from the Silicon Valley model, which again has its place. And the app model does work, but it's a very different game, and it's a very different kind of exit criteria of, let me start something. It's going to lose money for the next 5 to 10 years, but it's going to become a behemoth in the industry. And eventually it will be able to be profitable, and it's going to be trading at much higher multiples of 20 or 40x multiples because the potential is there. So it's just a very different game. But I love that you're kind of
So
playing in this other game, because so few people
totally.
talk about it, and it's equally very, very cool to do.
Well, there's a lot of people who talk about it, but not in the Silicon Valley world, right? And I think in the Silicon Valley world, lifestyle businesses, as you might call this one, are very much poo-pooed, um, and like just like that's not a real business. But that's that's not. I mean, the majority of the U.S. economy, from a jobs perspective, are these small businesses. Okay, one, two, there's this thing coming called the silver tsunami, which is what's referred to in like small business Twitter world. And that's the all of these small businesses, right? Like your friend's dad's HVAC and plumbing business, which has like he drives a Porsche, he takes the family to Cancun for and skiing in Deer Valley every year, and sends the kids to private school and private college with no, they didn't need to take out student loans, but the kids, they want to go work at Facebook and Google. And the dad is, 68, 70 now, retiring, and needs to sell the business, which has generated all this wealth for him, but it's not sexy at all. Like there are so many of those in the United States because so much wealth by baby boomers has been accumulated through these small businesses, which are not very sexy, but that's okay. And then we call it the silver tsunami because there's a tsunami of wealth and assets that are generating this cash flow, that need to trade to other generations, to really keep the U.S. economy in a healthy place, because there's all these jobs and commerce tied up in these small businesses, and so there's something cool about it from like a more macro perspective. Um, in that we're keeping these businesses alive,
The
right?
passing of the torch, if you will.
Yeah, if you will, exactly. And that is, I think that's part of why the U.S. government is helping facilitate that wealth transfer. By the way, I didn't get a loan with the government. I got a loan with a bank that is approved by the government to issue this loan. And if the loan goes bad, the government guarantees a certain percent of it. So the bank isn't left with a bag or a very small bag. Um, that's yeah. So that's one thing. Two is the other thing I was going to say, um, is in terms of the difference with startups and my business. I mean, one thing that I didn't anticipate with my business that I really liked is the employee profile of my business is very different from what my startup was. Um, the In my startup, it was hiring college educated graduates from other startups or big companies who have always had, I would say, B plus to A plus treatment as employees of a company. And when they would complain about things that happened at Brewbike, it was because they were getting B plus treatment and they wanted A plus. And in my business now, my sewing machine operators and my cutting machine operators and my general labor in the warehouse, I try to give them B plus to A plus treatment. And they love working at Newark Auto because they're used to C minus treatment as employees at these old manufacturing businesses. And it's very cool to be able to employ people and provide an experience like that, and build relationships with them, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's also a really neat part of this business model. And I think a lot of the businesses, these small businesses in this ETA world, have this characteristic. And a lot of searchers don't realize this until after they buy the business, and then they connect with other searchers, and we talk about how great that dynamic is.
Yeah, I mean, you're having a real positive impact that is quite tangible on people's lives immediately, just by bringing in kind of your level setting, your expectations of how employees should be treated, bringing that into this industry, into the company that you acquired, and yeah, getting to see that
Totally.
change day after day.
And we're not solving global hunger. Okay. We're not solving like these huge problems that startups are addressing, but yes, it's a lifestyle business and I can still have an impact on the people who I work with. And that impact is very meaningful for me. And it's something that really drives me to continue to grow the business because I want to provide more employment opportunities like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's local and it's real. And not to say that startups aren't real, but startups are built, their entire model from building for everything is that based on a future promise that in the future, this will be very valuable and we will solve these large problems. But obviously, based on the economics of it, a lot of those fail. The majority of those fail. Whereas with your business, you're coming in day one, it's a real business creating real jobs for real people and solving real pain points for other people, creating real profit. And it's all just maybe it's smaller scale, but it's real. Whereas startups are maybe have a grander or larger vision, but the likelihood of that becoming a reality is very difficult, as you know, you and I and many people have seen over and over again in the traditional startup Silicon Valley type approach.
So that was the beforehand, just before I totally agree with you. And I have some statistics on that. Before when I was searching for a point, this was the point I was trying to, and so you just reminded me is when I read that book by Walker called Buy and Build, um, he talked about the likelihood of success in doing what I'm doing versus like the startup. Essentially, there's like starting a business from scratch without venture financing is the riskiest form of entrepreneurship. And then once you bring in venture financing, the likelihood of success, or I think some sort of exit or just business continuation, I think it goes up to about like 20%, 25% in the book. But then if you look at the number of businesses with the 7A loan that I use that default on the loan, I think it's under 5%, which means that there's a 95% likelihood of success in doing what I'm doing. And that was a big factor for me as I was looking to do something next. Like I wanted to continue to be an entrepreneur, but I didn't want to keep doing this super risky kind of gamble in a startup environment. And so that was also really interesting. And again, that's with that likelihood of success, right? That 95% likelihood of success, you have to sign that personal guarantee on your SBA loan, where if things go south, you're signing over the equity you have in your home, like in whatever you have in assets to the bank if the business if something really terrible happens in the business. Again, that the likelihood of that happening is less than 5%. And then for those businesses that get into that those pickles, if you will, um, a lot of the times banks will be able to work it out in the wind down process to essentially sell the assets of the business so that there's not nearly as much that needs to be recovered from the lender. So it's really um, it's very rare that situations happen where somebody actually gets totally wiped out. But it does, and there's a lot of risk, and that risk doesn't exist nearly as much in the startup world. So
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. There's a different kind of sacrifice or risk that you might have on the startup side, which is the endless grind of fundraising and maybe the promise of some, you know, payout in the future. Whereas, you know, there's more risk upfront with taking on a loan and having a personal guarantee for buying a business. But the other side is that you have full control over it. You don't have to ever fundraise ever again. And you're buying something that's probably profitable on day one. So long as you don't mismanage it, and as long as you did your due diligence correctly, then you probably have a good chance, a 95% chance, or even higher, of seeing it through to a successful, stable business.
Totally. And I will say that with my business, right? So let's zoom in a little bit on what I've done specifically, right? I and entrepreneurship ETA folks could just buy a business with an SBA loan like I did and run it for 10 years, pay off the loan, not change a thing, and end up with $1 million plus asset that's generating hundreds of thousands of dollars a year and just continue to run the business as is. Right. And then that's a great way to accumulate wealth. And it's not, I don't know the risk profile versus trying to grow the thing because that's what I'm doing. But it's that's one path to go in. And and that's the one that you were talking about just now where you don't have to go out and raise more capital. Um, Things are pretty simple and straightforward, I think, in relative to fundamentally changing and growing the business,
Right.
which
Just
is
buying
what
it
I'm
to
trying
keep
to
it
do.
as a
Yeah,
recurring asset, and just it's an asset.
exactly.
I'm holding it. So talk about your strategy. Talk about what you are trying to do with Newark. You also talked about kind of aggregating and consolidating three different businesses together under one roof, or
hmm
maybe one portfolio. How do you think about that? What's your objective? What's your end game?
So Newark Auto, when I bought it, and it was like what? Okay, so right, I decide I want to buy a business and use this SBA loan, and then the question is, what type of business do I want to buy? And I thought about it in a similar way as like real estate investors who are going out to find a deal. And it's like, what type are you looking for? Commercial? Are you looking for residential? If you're looking for residential, are you looking for multifamily, um, single family? Like, what type of property are you looking for? And then when you're finding it, how are you going to add value? Right? Are you if you're looking for one multifamily property, are you really good at roofing or HVAC or like how do you want to improve this property so that you build more value in it, or are you just trying to find it, rent it out, generate some cash flow and not touch it, right? And in which case looking for a very different type of property. So again, with businesses, it's the same question, like what are you looking for and in what ways are you looking for it to be ugly, right? So that you can add that value and build that equity in it yourself. So I was looking for a business that was very much stuck in the old economy, which means still printers and copiers. In my case, dot matrix printers and typewriters were still in my business when I bought it. Um, and so I was looking for something that could be modernized, um, something that sold a consumer product where there was the ability to build a brand around that product. That's what I had done at Brewbike. I really enjoyed doing that process. Um, and so those were really the two things I was looking for. And then a certain earnings profile and size that would have worked with the loan. Um, and so when I found Newark Auto, what I really liked about it was it's super stuck in the old economy, right? So how we manufacture our products is so for example, like this chair, right, is a series of pieces of leather that are cut out in sizes and then upholstered, right? So what we did when I bought the company is we would have cut all of these pieces of leather using paper templates that were hanging on a rack in the back. So you would have taken a big piece of leather and then taken a template, put it down on the leather, traced it with chalk, and cut it with a hand scissor. Right, and we're doing hundreds of carpets for classic vehicles every week.
So
And
custom
so that
shapes
was
of carpets based on the make and model and year type thing, but all by hand and
exactly
all by taking down the mat
all
and
by
cutting
hand.
it out. Wow.
And we had thousands of these patterns in paper on these racks, and they vary by door number, body style, different notes about the vehicle, different years. I mean, we had thousands of them. And imagine training new employees on how to do that, right? So it how to find the right pattern, trace it properly, cut it. I mean, all these notes. And so so that was one part of the business when I bought it that I was like, wow, this could really be modernized. And then there had been no brand building done with the business for a really long time. I think since like the 50s or 60s, 70s, maybe. The way that we distributed our products was via other websites that carried them, like carparts.com carries our products, stockinteriors.com carries our products. Car Parts is a really big public company that sells tons of car parts. Stock Interiors is a niche website that carries interior parts for classic cars. And they would send us orders, and we would make the orders once they sent them to us and then ship it directly to their customers under their name. So we were like the drop shipper. Um, and I liked the made to order aspect of the business. So we I didn't have to buy a ton of inventory and stock it in my warehouse, which is very cumbersome from a working capital perspective. Instead, I just bought raw materials, and as orders came in, I would process those raw materials into carpet kits and then send them out to customers. So instead of stocking 1,000 SKUs, I just stocked 30 rolls of carpet, and I can make those into 1,000 SKUs. And the customers who are working on their vehicles are generally doing projects that take years. So if it takes 2 weeks to ship out their product, it's not the end of the world. We try to keep it under a week, but when we get to 2 weeks, it's still okay. When we get above 2 weeks, people start to get, where's my product? But still, that's a lot more wiggle room than most consumer products businesses, right? So that was something else. And when I say brand building, what I wanted to do was just essentially establish a brand in the marketplace where, like, Newark Auto is a 120-year-old manufacturer in domestically of these products. Like, and on car forums, people would talk about Newark Auto. Like, that's what I'm trying to get to, so that when people
direct
go
to
to
consumer
websites,
rather than just the reseller approach.
well, I think that direct to consumer, what we do on direct to consumer is both. Like, I have a website now where I sell all my products, and the direct to consumer is, sure. I mean, I could sell products on direct to consumer. That would be great. And those little, I mean, we don't do a ton of sales direct to consumer. The main purpose of the website is to build that brand so that we are sending customers to purchase our items through our dealers or through us, but generally they're getting better prices through our dealers, because I'm not trying to undercut my dealers.
Right.
I want to help my dealers, and I want them to build their businesses with our brand. But in order to do that, I need to establish more of a brand in the marketplace. So my website exists to do that and to justify the prices for my products. So if I'm listing a product on my website for $300, my dealers are selling it for maybe $289, $279. And so then customers are seeing it and they're saying, "Oh, I'm getting a better deal on the dealer's." You see what I'm saying? So it's,
yeah. You want to build that relationship and that trust with your resellers who are your main sellers, but also make sure
correct.
that, okay, now people know that Newark Auto stands for quality, stands for this type of product, and it doesn't matter where
Correct.
they buy it. Yeah.
People like to shop on the dealer sites also because they can buy carpets from me, but then they can also buy seats from a different manufacturer and headliner from a different manufacturer and door panels. And so they'll get a full interior from my dealer. But I want them to say, "Oh, I'm going to get a carpet. Okay, I'm going to get the Newark Auto carpet." Right. So that's what I've been trying to do from a brand building perspective. And so from a manufacturing perspective, which is the first one that I touched on, right? I was like, okay, I'll buy this business and I could implement some sort of CNC technology to cut all of the carpets instead of having a human tracing it and cutting it by hand. So that's one thing that we've worked on. And we now have 2 CNC machines cutting everything. From the made to order perspective, I've started to stock different materials and more materials to make different products, especially for these 2 other businesses that I've acquired and combined with Newark Auto, which I'll talk about more. And then from a brand building perspective, it's really been, okay, let's catalog our products really well. Let's take product photos, like great product photos, and then let's distribute that information to our website and to our dealers to help empower them to sell these products more effectively. And it's really simple, right? But it's been a few years. It's been very capital intensive in the factory to kind of retool the whole place. But now we have CNC machines that are cutting all of the fabric. And once fabric's cut, it's sent to sewing machine operators who sew it together. And then general warehouse labor that kind of packages it up and ships it out. So that's how the business, it's cut and sew. We cut fabric and then we sew fabric together. Um, from a and so and then from a distribution, right? We're still in the process of cataloging everything because there's so many products, capturing all the product photos and distributing them to our dealers. But by doing those two things, right, from a margin perspective, we're seeing margin expansion from the manufacturing improvements. And then from a top line growth perspective, we're seeing like 20-25% top line growth through just, we've gotten through like 10% of our catalog so far.
And that's just based
Um,
on better product photos and descriptions, and therefore people click on it more and they check out more with your products? Or
exactly. Yeah. I mean, when I bought the company, it was generic photos that were taken in the early 2000s. And there was like one photo for all 100,000 different products and variants, right? And so now we're just making sure that our dealers are properly listing all of the different variations and products on their websites so that when they spend money on ads or they bring when they have a user click on their product page, everything's displayed properly to help them sell the product and make the margin on that, and then it also help us, right? So it's win-win. Um, so and that's been how we've been growing the business. Then essentially, but by doing all of that, especially on the manufacturing side, the fixed costs of the business have gone up a lot. So there's software. There's also additional debt service for all of the machinery that we've acquired. Um, there's parts that are needed and repairs that are needed, all like on a quarterly basis for the machines, um, et cetera. I mean, there's more electrical, right? And it's just the fixed cost of the business has gone up by modernizing it. And so I've been looking for really quick wins for how we can increase top line sales to help cover all of those fixed costs to make sure that we still have a healthy bottom line. And so what I've said, okay, so how do we do that, right? Well, my business does two things. The first thing we do is we cut and sew fabric, right? The second thing we do is we make products for classic cars. And that's what the brand stands for. So I said, okay, those two things, can I go and find other businesses that have those two traits? And one I found on eBay a few years ago because my buddy was reached out to me and asked if I made carpets for classic Porsches, and I didn't. But eBay is like the place where everyone sells car parts. So I went on eBay and looked up, and I found this seller who reminded me of my business when I bought it because all of the product photos were really old, like really poor product photos, but the reviews on his eBay account were really great. Like people loved the products he made, and they said they fit the vehicles really well, which is important. So I reached out to him and asked him if he would sell his business to me. And like literally, I just sent him an eBay message and asked him if he'd sell his business to me. And I figured from the product photos and the descriptions that he was older and maybe looking to retire at some point. And he said, "Yeah, I'd love to sell my business to you." So I went out there to Oregon where he was located, and I took a few trips out there. And it turns out he literally was one man shop in his garage for 45 years making carpets and other interior components for classic Porsches.
wow.
But I really wanted to get into the Porsche game because these are much higher margin products, for much higher value vehicles, right, than an old Plymouth or Pontiac. So eventually ended up buying his business, financing it with not an SBA loan. Um, I essentially raised some money from friends and family, and I'm paying them back with just like a traditional loan structure, um, 3-year payback, kind of competitive interest rate. But then all of a sudden I'm able to bring in this additional business, right? So I'm adding maybe another, call it 100 grand to the top line, right? And so there's more income and then gross profit to cover those fixed costs. And I'm making more things in my factory. So the factory's busier, which means it's running more efficiently in most cases. And then, and the business, what it does is two things. It cuts and sews fabric again, right? And it makes parts for classic cars. And I actually think that by adding Porsche to our business, we're building that brand even more effectively because Porsche stands for quality. Like Porsches are beautiful vehicles that stand for quality, and that's what I want too. So now we offer Porsche products. Um, the other one is a very similar deal type thing. It's for headliners for classic American cars. So the fabric that goes on this interior of the ceiling of the car, right? Um, if you get into your car and you look at the ceiling, it has fabric on it. And in old cars, it was a very simple kind of, it's called bow style. So there's a few different rectangles of headliner material that are sewn together. So again, it's cut and sew fabric for classic cars. And I found this company through one of my dealers who sent me his info because he had reached out to the business, the dealer, and said, or my reseller, right? And he asked them if he could carry their products on his website, and they said, no, we can't actually take on more business right now, but if you want to buy our business, we would sell it to you. So he just forwarded it to me because he knew I was looking for opportunities, and I ended up buying out this business in Georgia that made headliners, again, 45 years, husband and wife doing it in their garage, amazing reputation. Um, and so that's another $150,000 to the top line, let's say. And again, those are two tiny businesses, but growing them is doing the same thing that I was doing with Newark Auto already. So I'm not doing anything new. I'm doing more of the same, but all of a sudden I've created a bunch of new revenue, added a bunch of new revenue to my business just by buying those. I'm able to make them in my factory. So I brought those two businesses and just moved them to New Jersey and are stocking the materials in my factory. And then building those businesses and the brand of Newark Auto is it requires the same activities as I was doing before I had them in my factory. So that's kind of how I've tried to expand sales in 23. And in 24, I'm not planning on doing any additional acquisitions. It's just going to be focusing on expanding sales with these three different catalogs.
So I love how you break down in detail how you find these deals or how you found these additional small businesses or mom and pops literally that you've acquired and kind of rolled into your business, increased top line. I am curious, sitting here on a podcast kind of talking through the details, it sounds like, oh wow, that was so great and I'm sure it's profitable and that was a great acquisition. Talk about like how was it truly super easy? You just add some new SKUs to your workflow and now you're selling through a different channel and like little change and now you're just manufacturing Porsche carpets as well as, everything that you were doing before. Um, or was there a lot more effort that you had to put in or your team had to put in to kind of, were there problems that ensued of, oh, well, the CNC machine isn't wide enough, so it can't actually do these Porsche X, Y, and Z's, or was it truly just like, okay, we just picked up some more things that we can now manufacture. We need a couple more materials, but it's good to go, and we're making the same profit or better profit than they were doing it when they were doing it in their garage.
Mm-hmm. I think somewhere in between the two, right? So when I bought Newark Auto and then I bought the CNC machines, I went through a bunch of like steps from like needing a CNC machine period as like um the most generic, like wide view, like 30,000 foot, like we could use a CNC machine to cut this fabric, right? Down to like each stitch being like perfect on the sewing machines, right? Like that's the most fine level of detail. And because I had gone from that 30,000 foot down to every stitch on the Newark Auto products, when I acquired these two other businesses, I had skipped maybe 25,000 feet. So I knew there were a bunch of things that I knew would work and I had checked already. So when I reached out to the suppliers for the headliner fabric and the Porsche carpets, I knew the width. And so I knew which machine I'd be able to cut it on. And I ordered samples so I could see which machine and how it cut and stuff like that. But then all of a sudden with the Porsche material, we need to use a different type of glue and that glue needs to cure. So you spray the glue and then all of a sudden it takes a few minutes to cure before it gets sticky, and then you can stick something to it. But the amount of curing time depends on the temperature in the space. So in the morning when it's really cold, it takes longer, but in the afternoon when it heats up, it's faster. So like things like that were new, but I knew I could figure that out because I had figured it out for Newark Auto. And so I I guess I bought the two businesses kind of the Porsche one is much more complicated, and I bought that in July. The headliner one is very simple, and I bought it in October. The headliner one's just running. Like it's been very straightforward and simple. The Porsche one's a lot more complicated, and so it's taken a few months for me to get to a point where I'm comfortable listing it on my website and starting to publish it with my dealers. Um, and it's required sending multiple samples to the existing customers until we get to a point where they're happy with the quality. And I knew that would happen. And I've had to pause the growth activities for Newark Auto while to get these other businesses to a point where they're able to get through the manufacturing process properly. Um, so it's a little bit of both. I mean, I don't think anyone else could have bought these two businesses, right? Like there was
Very
nothing,
niche.
there were no employees. It's very niche. Like somebody would be buying themselves a job, right? But because I had all of this capability in my factory, going out and finding these two for me made a lot of sense. And so I was able to kind of speed up the process, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think the intentionality that you have put into both finding Newark Auto in the first place, but then saying, "What do I have? What do I have?" And then where can that add more value, or where can I add more things in that perfectly complement what I'm already doing? And then not just kind of going out and saying and finding something, oh, well, headlamps like for old cars, headlights for old cars, that well, it's kind of similar and maybe we'll just stock those in our inventory and we'll keep them in the garage in the warehouse and ship those out too. No, you wanted exactly the same exact things that you were already doing, but in a slightly different space, slightly different
But like
vertical.
I didn't include the part where I spent $2,500 flying to Florida, staying in hotels, renting a car to go look at a business that made things like headlights, or they made what they made are like the hardware for the convertible tops. So for old Mustangs, it wasn't the actual fabric, but it was the hardware that was used to lift the top and put it back down. And I passed on that business because I realized, wow, this is not our process at all, right? So I like
A different business. Yeah.
I've had failures along the way, which some people would say that's a huge failure. You lost all that money. But for me, I'm just learning a ton. I've figured out exactly what type of businesses I'm looking to acquire to expand mine. And yeah, it's, it hasn't been as simple. You know, it's just an hour podcast. I could go on for days talking about this stuff.
So you talked about 2023 kind of looking for opportunities, or maybe kind of talked about the first year or first bit coming in and bringing in your ability to create better systems, better process, modernize the business. Then you talked about expansion of top line. So you talked about kind of these two additional acquisitions that you went through with the Porsche and the headliner businesses that you kind of rolled in, or products, or and they're not even really businesses if it's just kind of like you said, a job. You rolled those in 2024, 2025, and the next 30 years. Like what is the plan? Where are you going? What do you want to do next? I know you want to build this brand, but long term, what is the vision that you see? Is it going to be kind of growth and improve EBITDA and then acquire some more stuff and then merge that in and then growth and EBITDA? Kind of what's your long term strategy?
So people ask me this all the time, and I don't really have an answer. And I think it's like, but when I respond to them, it's kind of it like my response. People ask me this so much, and I kind of have a response to it. Um, the that like something that I formulated that I just keep using. Um, I'm just trying to think about how to like expand on that for this, but I'll start with just the response, which is I don't know, and I don't really have any options right now because I'm going through that startup J curve. If you like, I'm still in the J. I'm coming out of the J curve right now, but like what you said, in 21 I bought the business, and it was kind of more than halfway through 21. So let's say 22 was just like retooling the factory. Uh, I had to find new staff. for a lot of positions, because when you fundamentally change a business, you also have to generally find new people. Um, and that was really capital intensive. Okay. So then in 23, it's been okay, let's get out of this phase where we're just spending, and let's try to start generating some cash and growing the business and increasing top line. So that's been 23. And I I don't really have an option of just going to like sell the business right now. Because I'm coming out of that J curve, and it would take a few years for me to get to a point where I would have that option, right? But that option of like exiting the business, the activities to get there in 3 years or 5 years are the same activities for building an awesome lifestyle business. They're the same activities for having enough cash in the bank to buy another business that's probably larger than the other two that I acquired to really expand Newark Auto. They're the same activities as continuing to just run Newark Auto myself, and just, having enough income through this business to afford everything that I need in life, employ people and give them great employment opportunities and career development, etc. It's the same activities to hire a general manager to run Newark Auto so I could uh, go find another business or work on something else, right? Like there are all these different options that could present themselves in 3 to 5 years, but to get those options available, like they pretty much all require me to do the same things over the next 3 to 5 years. So how I see it is like I'm just heads down trying to get to a place where in a few years I have all these different options. But it doesn't even matter at this point what I want in 3 to 5 years, because to get there, I have to do the same thing. So I'm just focusing on doing those things. And um, there's different in certain businesses, that's not the case, right? If you want to get to outcome A, you have to do set this set of activities. And if you want to get to outcome B, you have to do a different set of activities. But in my business, I feel like they're all the same. So that's what I'm focusing on.
You've got a certain amount of roadway. The work just needs doing. And sure, it's going to open up different options. You will have to make decisions. You will need to be more strategic in the future. But that's all a luxury, and it's ungrounded because you just need to do the work that's in front of you, right?
And in a lot of cases, I think that's true in businesses where you know what your 3 to 5 year plan is, but but in the 1 year perspective, once you figure out what do I need to do in the next year to help me get to the 3 to 5 year plan or the 3 to 5 year goal, once you figure out what you need to do in the next year, spending any brain power thinking about the 3 to 5 year is actually a distraction, because it's taking you away from doing what you need to do in the next year. And I mean, if you get that year view and you can break it down into quarters, spending time thinking about Q3 when you're in Q1 is a distraction from doing what you need to do in Q1. Right. So I very much take that perspective where I don't want to think about the 3 to 5 year. All I want to think about is what I need to do right now.
Focus on the problems right in front of you.
Yeah,
Because maybe
exactly.
to close us out here, for other people who might be exposed to this as even being an option, maybe they're considering entrepreneurship, maybe they've already done, or sorry, this is entrepreneurship, but maybe they were on the tech
Mhm.
entrepreneurship path and kind of the venture backed route. And now they're saying, okay, well, I've already done that, or maybe I don't even want to do that. I want to explore this a little bit more, even in the different interest rate environment. Maybe it's more expensive now, but there's always a deal to be had, especially with the silver
Totally.
wave or silver crescendo. What's it called?
Silver
Tsunami.
tsunami.
Got to have that alliteration. So, what would your recommendation be for someone who wants to kind of start explore this? And additionally, what would you say the biggest disparity between your expectations versus how this has actually unfolded over the past 2.5 years have been, and kind of a words of wisdom from someone who's been in the trenches doing it?
Biggest disparity is there's a lot of talk about how this is like you can find a business that's easy to run and like has management team in place and et cetera, et cetera. And at the end of the day, like I don't if it, I it's hard to find any form of entrepreneurship that doesn't require your entire being in the first few years and more. And I think if you're out there trying to find a business to buy or a way to get into entrepreneurship, that doesn't require your full being and more for at least a few years, you might be looking for the wrong thing. Because I feel like that's core when you're getting into being an entrepreneur. And if you're looking right now, it's probably your first time getting into the sea. Like it takes some reps before I think for most people before you can chill out a little bit, and I'm still not there. So that's been the biggest shocker. But it's not really specific to my form of entrepreneurship. I think it's just
I
any
think
sort of business.
it's very true that there is no easy path. It's actually probably the hardest path is starting something, or even if you're buying something and kind of turning around or improving it. There's just a whole
Or
lot of
just
work.
keeping it the same is really hard. Like just running it in steady state is it requires your full being and more period if it's your first time. Um, and yeah, so that's one thing. Um, for me, I hear that and I'm like, let's go. But for other like because I but for others, it's they're looking for that business that has a GM in place and that business that. And the bottom line is, if that's what you're looking for, you have to understand that GM might leave, or that GM could get hit by a bus tomorrow, and then all of a sudden you are the one doing it, and so just be ready for that.
If someone is
The
equally as geared up and excited by that prospect, I mean, you mentioned that book.
Yeah, yeah,
Where
yeah.
else would you
So, and then
recommend that
in terms of
people get started?
finding ETA, I
What is
there's small
ETA?
biz entrepreneurship through acquisition.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. And if you're interested in getting into it, there's I think the number one book for doing what I've done with this loan program is Buy Then Build by Walker Dybel. And Walker also has a 10-week long online cohort program called the Acquisition Lab, which I also went through, which was incredibly valuable. I wouldn't have been able to buy my business or start this path without it. Um, and that I highly recommend that too. But I wouldn't do that until you read the book. But then there's also SMB Twitter, which is you could just hashtag SMB Twitter, and there's so much on Twitter about buying small businesses. There's some lenders who have great accounts that talk about different deals that are done, and if you go to SMB Twitter, it'll all be there. I'm also if any of your listeners want to talk to me about it, I'm happy to talk to them. It's I geek out on this stuff.
I love it. If they do want to connect with you, where should they go to find you?
I'm not on anything because in the same vein as I was saying with the 3 to 5 year, thinking about the 3 to 5 year when you're not thinking about the next quarter. For me, like all of this Instagram, social media stuff, Facebook, all of it
Just
is
noise.
like it's just so much noise when all I want to focus on is the next quarter or the next week. So you got to email me, and my email is Lucas at Newark-Auto.com. And you should just put that in the show notes or something so people can reach out
Will
to
do.
me.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Lucas. It was a
Thanks
blast.
for having me. Yeah, it's fun talking about this stuff with you.
Thanks again.